Thank you for joining the American Cinematheque Q&A with director Eugene Ashe. Film historian and filmmaker Jim Hemphill is moderating the discussion. I'm Gwen Diglis, Deputy Director for the American Cinematheque, and I'd like to invite you to visit our website, americancinematheque.com, where you can find information on how to support the American Cinematheque by becoming a member or making a donation. SYLVIE'S Love is streaming on Amazon Prime. If you have not seen it, please check it out and enjoy the discussion. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. My name is Jim Hemphill, and on behalf of the American Cinematheque, it's my great pleasure to welcome our guest tonight, the writer-director of one of my favorite movies of 2020, SYLVIE'S Love, Mr. Eugene Ashe. Welcome, Eugene.
Thanks for having me, Jim. I appreciate it. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, my pleasure. I really love this movie, and I guess I want to start by asking a little bit about the origins of it, because I read that it started with some family photographs. And I'm curious, what were the photos of, and how did they kind of start you thinking about the ideas that would enter into this movie?
Well, I mean, it's really just looking at my family photo albums and also my favorite record albums from the time. I just felt that they really told a very different story of Black life than I was seeing depicted in movies and on screen. Most of the time when we see a period piece with Black folks, it's generally framed through our struggle or our tribulations in some way. So there was this whole other life that we never got a chance to see, because that's primarily the focus of period pieces.
And, you know, I watched your Cinematheque video about your cinematic influences, and I'm curious, you know, you talked about something like 5 films on there, but then you mentioned that there were over 50 films that you showed your collaborators. And I'm curious how the movies that influenced you and those album covers and the family photographs, how that all kind of intersected with whatever research you did into the period and just with your own imagination in terms of creating the screenplay. In other words, how much of it comes from other movies you love? How much is from the photos? How much is it of it from your own life? You know, I know that's a huge question, but.
Well, I mean, they sort of all go hand in hand. You know, I had an idea to create a film that looked like it was actually shot during that time. And that also played like a film from that time. So, you know, it has its fair share of melodrama, and it's got its, you know, a little bit of a slower pace. The shots are a little longer and set up a little differently than a modern movie. And then, so really all of the other influences, so Pink Panther, for instance, there's a scene with Fran Jeffries where she performs Meglios de Serra, you know, and that kind of directly influences the Eva Longoria piece. So my wife, Nina, who choreographed that, you know, I made her watch that film about 100 times because we were really trying to capture, you know, more than just ape a movie or just rip it off. We're trying to kind of capture this spirit or feeling of nostalgia that you get from watching it. You know, when you watch those Turner Classic Movies, or you watch, you know, because none of us were really alive when they were in the theaters. I've seen a lot of these movies in Film Forum and Film Center in New York, you know, so I was able to see some of them in person, and projected, but I also kind of analyzed and poured over them, you know, hundreds of times on my own, you know, television set at home.
Yeah, I mean, your love for those movies is really clear. And one of the things I like about this movie is that it's like you say, you're not imitating or ripping off. It just feels like these movies are so much sort of, you've absorbed them into your DNA and they're coming out. Right. And I love the look of the movie. It's got a gorgeous visual style. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about your collaboration with the cinematographer. I mean, what kinds of conversations did you have with the DP in terms of figuring out what the visual principles for the movie were going to be and how you would achieve that look you wanted?
Yeah, I mean, you know, of course, it's the great Declan Quinn. And he just, you know, Declan is a real technician, but he's also a wonderful artist. And what we talked about was, you know, the first decisions made were whether to make a film that kind of visually, we weren't trying to make Carol, for instance, you know, even though at some point, you know, I certainly entertained making a more intimate and indie looking film like Carol or A Single Man. Those really kind of look, it's just a different vibe. You know, we started looking at Brooklyn, for instance, as an example. And so the decisions to early on, you know, I'd seen films like Jackie and most of the films that were shot during that time, that were set during that time, were shot on Super 16. And so we talked about just that there is a grain kind of thing happening on Super 16 that, you know, modern 35 is really, it's almost indiscernible from digital. So it doesn't give you the same sort of, you know, nostalgia that Super 16 gives you. So that was the kind of the first decision we made. And then it just kind of all spiraled out from there. We talked about framing, we watched a lot of those same movies and kind of looked at how they were framed, what kind of cuts, how they were edited even in the beginning, you know, before we even shot. So we'd know what kind of coverage. As you know, this is a low budget film, relatively low for, you know, for the scope of it. I would say it's high budget for an indie, but low budget for the scope. And so that's the thing, you had to just kind of figure out, because we were shooting on film, we really needed to be economical about our coverage. We couldn't just shoot everything, you know, and we couldn't just dress everything, you know, so everything, we were we packed the frame to get as much production value in the frame that we had. You know, if it was 2 inches out, of the frame, it wasn't dressed.
Right. Well, and given that you were working with sort of limited resources for a movie of this scale, what were the factors that went into deciding to shoot it on studio backlots and in LA? I mean, were there ever you mentioned at one point thinking about shooting it in New York. I mean, how did you get to that point where you ended up shooting it very much like one of those movies from the late 50s or early 60s on a studio backlot?
Yeah, I mean, it's, I think originally we were trying to shoot in May and in New York. We were going to shoot on some sound stages here in New York and some real life stuff, the brownstone stuff we were going to really do in Harlem and upstate. There's a lot of old brownstones and very New York-y looking buildings in upstate New York, and they have, of course, a great tax incentive to work up there. But the simple truth was that Tessa wasn't available then. She was available in February, and we knew who our star was, you know, and we really wanted, this movie doesn't get made without her, and not because she got it financed. It's not the same movie. She was Sylvie, you know, we really all knew that. She just kind of embodied her. And so it was important to us that we made the movie with Tessa, and first of all, it was fantastic that she, with all of the stuff she's doing with Marvel and Westworld and everything else, that she was even willing to take her 1 month off and make this movie and empower, you know, a second-time director who no one had really heard of. Mm-hmm. So it was just great that she did that. And so we wanted to make it work any way we could. And I had studied architecture in Los Angeles, so I knew all of the old buildings like the Talmadge, which we shot in, and downtown LA. I had friends who had lived down there when I was in college in LA. And I knew, of course, the backlots had the brownstones. They built them in the 30s because they needed them. That was the one thing Los Angeles didn't have. So they built New York streets. So I knew we could get the look. There were films like Sparkle that were set in 1950s New York that were shot entirely on the Warner Brothers lot or in Paramount, you know, so I knew I could get the look. And then it was just a question of really just leaning into it once we were here, really, you can't help but make this type of movie when you're on those backlots. I mean, you know, you can try to make something that's rooted in reality, but there's a fantastical element that if you miss it, then you're really missing the point.
Yeah. Well, in the movie also, another way that it, you know, is very much in the tradition of those studio movies is the costumes are just incredible in it. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how you approach the wardrobe for both of your leads and what you were hoping to convey about their characters through the clothes.
Yeah. Well, first of all, just the everyday elegance of the people of that time. You know, when we do see a film set in that time with Black folks, you are seeing them, like I said, sort of in struggle mode. So you're not going to have someone walking down the street in a civil rights march wearing a blue Chanel gown, as Tessa's wearing in the opening scene. So I wanted to, so there was that. But, you know, really just kind of, I wanted it to be pitch perfect and really show the kind of tailoring of the time and the way that that the people from, I just really wanted a sense of authenticity. And Phoenix Mello, who did the costume design on it, had worked on Mad Men, which of course was pretty spectacular. And she had also worked doing the fittings on Black Panther. And, you know, I mean, it's more futurist, but at the same time, it's really about the fit, you know. That was the big thing that we talked about, just because when I see a period piece, often, you know, they're pulling stuff from a costume place and they're just throwing them on people, and they don't have the type of tailoring, you know, people during that time, if you bought an off the rack suit, you still got it tailored. I mean, everyone did. So that was something that really Tom Ford did a really great job of in The Single Man, but you know, he's Tom Ford, he's a fashion designer. So of course he got it right. But I've seen people get it wrong. And so we really wanted to make sure that happens. Another thing we do is we use the color blue in wardrobe and production design, in lighting, to convey the times when Sylvia and Robert are coming together. There's always blue involved when she sees him for the first time playing. It's at the Blue Morocco, and it's got a blue light cast, and he's got on a navy blue tuxedo. And of course, in the opening, they haven't seen each other in 5 years, and she has on this Tiffany blue colored Chanel gown, because we got several gowns from Chanel, about 3 gowns from Chanel that we used in the piece. But yeah, those are the types of conversations Phoenix and I had about tailoring, about really kind of. Also, one thing that we talked about is all of the people, the men and women, are wearing undergarments from the era. So the women are really strapped in, and it changes your posture. And so we talked about that. We talked about the posture of the people and how it's very different than today. You know, we walk around in sweatpants, and we go to, you know, check out jazz and go to the opera with sweatpants on and a sweatshirt, you know. And everyone during that time was really kind of, there was a different way of carrying yourself. And, you know, Robert Nnamdi Asomugha plays Robert, you know, I mean, someone just said they reminded him of Jimmy Stewart, you know. And I've heard Cary Grant, and it's all about his posture, the way he carries himself, you know. So it's, all of those things add up to, you know, what you see on screen.
The audience questions are starting to come in, but I've got to ask you before I move over to the audience about the music in the film, because obviously, as many people probably know, your background is in music. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how you approached both the score and the original music for the jazz quartet in the movie, because that's all just fantastic.
Yeah, well, they were done by the same person, a fantastic composer, Fabrice Lecomte, who is also a dear friend. Fabrice was the first person I hired. He's been working on this before we even ever got it funded. He's just a friend and started working on it, and he's really terrific. The broad stroke is, you know, the needle drops and the original tunes that he wrote. We really wanted the original tunes to be consistent with jazz from the era, we wanted it to sound like Bob and sound like something that guys would be playing from that time. That's another thing I've seen other people get wrong that we really were super specific about. And then the underscore is really, so those things represent kind of what's going on externally, and the underscore really represents their love and what is coming from sort of within them and within their love. So you really have this sweeping 60-piece orchestra, and that's really, it's this kind of big, lush, overwhelming score that really makes their love have a different meaning, Mm-hmm. It really makes those scenes, it just changes the entire mood of them when you have that. And that's what those older movies used to do. When you had a Michel Legrand, when you had an Elmer Bernstein, mm-hmm. When you had these guys scoring those pieces, it just really makes something that could be melodramatic with the wrong score all of a sudden have this different level of depth. Mm-hmm. Their argument, I'm assuming everyone who's going to be asking questions has watched this, but the argument at in the third act, I mean, that's just really, it's brilliant what Fabrice did. He starts to bring in these bigger, heavier strings and bass horn instruments, just like this kind of like feeling that really brings this kind of weight to the second half of the movie. And earlier on, it's very kind of light, and he's got piccolo, and he's like kind of fluttering lighter instruments, and he just starts laying it on. That by the end, it's almost like you feel like you're in a different movie.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, the movie has such a delicate tone, and I feel like one of the things you really pulled off beautifully is knowing like how melodramatic to make it without going too far, where to be subtle and pull back. And was that something that was difficult in the editing room? Like, did the movie evolve a lot in the editing room in terms of how sad to make it at times, how light to make it, how dark to make it, or did it stay pretty
consistent? I mean, as you well know, the script is a blueprint for the house, and shooting it is you're building the house, and then the edit is when you put the paint on and furnish it. Mm-hmm. So it's you're always, that always kind of happens. You shoot what you think you need, and then it's like, it's like when you write something, you may describe something, or you may have dialogue that you don't need in the end. Mm-hmm. It's like, we don't need her to say that at all. You can see it, it's all in her eye. Mm-hmm. So that's the thing too, is that's what you do. You kind of back off some of that stuff, but it would be almost like anachronistic if it was too like you need that melodrama to sell the period, to really sell it as a film from that time. So there's like a lot of stuff that happens at one time, and some things like that, but we try to do it in a nuanced enough way that you believe you're watching a movie from that time. That's just the way those movies were, those Douglas Sirk and Delbert Mann, that's just, it's the genre, it's inherent in the genre. So. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I thought about Douglas Sirk a lot. Douglas Sirk, and I also thought a lot about The Way We Were. That was another movie, which is
well, that was a gigantic influence on me. The Way We Were. I mean, just besides the chemistry of Redford and Streisand, just the way Pollack put it together. It's just I really and I know there's so much he left on the editing room floor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Barbra Streisand really was not happy with. A lot of her character, a lot of the plot mechanics were just shifted, and she didn't dig it, but the world loved it. We all loved it.
Right. Yeah. Well, I'm going to move on to some audience questions here. Let's see. This is a question about the pacing of the movie, and it says, how did you decide on the pacing of the film, cutting between 1962 back to 5 years earlier? How did you decide on a nonlinear version of the story?
I just, I had a couple of drafts early on where it was linear, and I felt like you needed kind of, you kind of needed, I wanted the opening feeling. I wanted it to feel like we were in that kind of cool jazz 60s, like 1962, 1963. That was like a taste thing. I didn't like opening in the 50s. I just felt like I didn't want to spend that much time in the 50s in the beginning. I wanted to let people know that it was going to be that there was this kind of Breakfast at Tiffany's type of thing coming, and that there was this kind of cool, slick, Technicolor movie coming. And that, because we used a lot of like kind of sepia and like that kind of feeling even in the clothing early on for the 50s stuff.
Right.
And then 60s gets really, really cool. Like it gets cool just in temperature, So I wanted to open with that and let you feel that was happening. And that kind of buys you, that period in the 50s, I think. For me, it does. And then I had it where I spent a lot of time in that opening, like in the 60s, and then flashback like later on in it. And I didn't really like that either. It felt like it was felt like a weird kind of like we were stuck in the middle for a while. So this seemed to work the best. But it was in the script. It wasn't, we futzed around with it a little bit in the editing room, but it was basically in the script.
Mm-hmm. There's a couple questions here about the music. You talked a little bit about your collaboration with the composer, but this one is specifically about influences. They asked, what type of direction did you provide to the composer, and was Bernard Herrmann an influence for the score?
No, definitely. I definitely not Bernard Herrmann. Really, the big one was Michel Legrand.
Mm-hmm.
Was the big one. Fabrice Lecomte is half French and half Italian, and he comes from a very big. He's had his pieces performed at Lincoln Center and Carnegie Hall. He's an orchestral jazz composer, and that's like kind of his background. And that's what we were really going for, was that big sweeping Michel Legrand type of score.
Mm-hmm. Someone else asks if there are plans for the soundtrack to be released.
Yeah, actually, the first single came out yesterday, and it's the song "Beloved" with Cécile McLaurin-Salvant, the song in French that's right at the end credits, and the entire thing, including the jazz tunes and the underscore, which are some beautiful melodic pieces in there. That comes out on the 23rd, which is the day that the film is out, and that it's everywhere. It's on Apple, it's on Amazon, it's anywhere you can buy music.
Mm-hmm.
It's actually, you can do a placeholder. If you go check out the single, you'll see all of the tunes that are coming. It's like, I don't know, 34 tunes or something.
Good. Yeah, I really loved the score, and you just put your finger on what I loved about it when you said melodic, because I feel like that's something a lot of scores for some reason have gotten away from melodic, in recent years.
That's not their fault. That's not their fault. I think directors are really like afraid it's going to take away from the dialogue or take away from the scene, and it can do just the opposite.
Mm-hmm.
The part where they're in the Plaza Hotel, that's beautiful. That tune it's a tune, and it really works. One thing I was going to say about the soundtrack, for any of the real vinyl heads out here, we're releasing it on vinyl, which is super great, right at the top of the year. And it's this wonderful, heavy blue colored platter. It's going to be really, really cool with some great art.
Excellent. I'm going to move to another audience question. This is good because we haven't talked too much about the acting, which is obviously a hugely important part of the movie. This question says, the scene at the Chinese restaurant where Robert's hands are shaking brought me to tears. It was a moment of male vulnerability you don't commonly see on screen. Can you talk about writing that scene and how you worked with the actors to bring out authentic moments of vulnerability in the characters?
That is a fantastic question, and I'll tell you why. It was very important for me, and we talked about this from the beginning with Nnamdi. Nnamdi Asomugha, if you don't know, was a professional football player. He was a Los Angeles Raider, and he's married to the actress Kerry Washington. But it was very important to us to show a Black man, especially one who's 6'3", be vulnerable. That was one of our major goals. It was so, it was such a powerful moment during the NBA championships when Doc Rivers was crying on TV, you know, because he was so upset by George Floyd and what was going on. And that's what we need to see. We need to let people know that, you know, Black men are not invincible and that we do have a vulnerable side. So it was really important for us to do that. You know, nobody, you know, even the Lacey character, he doesn't smack her around or anything, or, you know, all of the stuff is just mental and you know,
Mm-hmm.
so, and he's even vulnerable and leaves with dignity, you know, so.
And so what in the scenes in the movie that are very vulnerable and emotional, I mean, what kind of environment do you try to set up for the actors to try to facilitate their best work?
Yeah, I mean, it's just, you got to take your time. You got to be patient and allow for them to arrive at that point. I don't always, we rehearsed a lot of those scenes. So I did have some rehearsal time, but of course, between rehearsal and when we started shooting, you know, there's a little lapse. So what I'd like to do is have them kind of come to set during the blocking and we start kind of running it a little bit before it's completely set. We're still setting, just so it happens kind of organically. If I feel like they're really starting to lock into something, then I'll kind of stop it and let them save it for the take. But yeah, you got to be patient with that stuff, with the vulnerability. The Chinese restaurant is, I mean, there's actually more of it that I wish, you know, I couldn't have a 3-hour movie, but it's a really, really special scene from the production design and everything, but it really, you really catch his vulnerability there. There's just some looks on his face that they're just beautiful. I mean, it's had that same reaction on several people. You know, of course, you know, when I'm editing, I'm showing people the movie, I'm showing friends, I'm bringing people in and did a couple of test screenings. And that was one thing that everyone talked about, was just what a pleasure it was to see a Black man be vulnerable, which was interesting. You know, not to make it all about race. Men in general are often not vulnerable in movies, but particularly in the time we're living in, it's important, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned talking about the blocking and the rehearsal and everything leads to another question for me, which is, you know, again, the movie has such a beautifully precise visual style. How do you, as a director, you know, are you the kind of director who, you know, very precisely storyboards and shot lists everything? Or do you get there on the day and respond to what the actors are doing and kind of build your camera movements around that? Or is it kind of a combination of the two?
You know, it's funny. I've been a storyboard artist for other people's films, and I don't storyboard. What I do is I definitely have framing references, you know, from other films or from photographs. You know, I may draw a box around a section of something, and Declan and I will work it out. Usually, we'll have a meeting the day before we're going to shoot, at the end of a shoot day, and we'll just kind of go over, you know, the scenes that we're covering, and we'll really kind of hash it out. But we already have a pretty strong sense. And once you establish a visual language, then it really starts to, you just know where to put the camera, you know how to block. Even Tessa is really, because she's done so many films, like, you know, Marvel films and things like that, Men in Black, you know, these large budget films, she's very, very good at blocking. So often, you know, I want to put her somewhere and she'd just be like, well, what about this? And it was just like, well, that's better. So that's good too, you know? So you have to just sort of look, it's a collaborative medium. And if I have to micromanage the entire process, then I've hired the wrong people. Mm-hmm. So I try to really give people the creative freedom. You know, look, I know I have a certain visual sense, and there's something I'm trying to get across. But if someone knows exactly where to put the camera to get it done, I'm not going to start arguing with them about it. You know, Declan's done way more movies than I have. So it's just kind of great to be able to, he can just kind of, he just knows, I'll tell him something and he'll just be like, he just knows exactly what to do. Even if I, you know, I'll frame something up and I won't even have to talk to him about it again. I'll come back and look in the monitor and it's just like, well, that's exactly it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, usually it's very rare that I had to move stuff around, and we had Christian Epps as our chief lighting technician, and same thing with lighting. You know, it's like, this guy's done, you know, a ton of films, worked with Spike Lee and stuff. So it's like, it's overstood. You know, if I say something to them, you know, the worst thing you could do is tell these guys who are so seasoned, you know, like tell them the thing over and over again. It's like, yeah, I know.
Yeah, it's always one of the funniest things about directing to me, that in a way the director is the person in charge. It's their vision, but you're also the least experienced person on the set. Like every person on a set usually has made more movies than the director, which is, you know.
That's right. Even including Martin Scorsese. Most people, you know,
absolutely.
Most people on the crew, because they're working. I mean, look how many shows they're doing a year.
Right.
You know, we're lucky if we do one every 2 years. You know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So yeah, it's just not even. You just, you
know. So let's see, another audience question we've got here. This is, what was the most, this is sort of a two-part question. What was the most frustrating aspect of directing this film from an emotional and technical perspective? And what was the most rewarding?
Yeah, I would say because we shot in February instead of May, my prep time was not what I wanted it to be. So that was the most challenging. I think we decided we were actually really going to go like December something of 2018. And then we were shooting, I mean, we were in pre-production in January. And so in addition to that, it was also very hard to crew up. So to get everybody who I wanted, because a lot of people go on vacation during that time, Hollywood kind of shuts down. So getting the people I wanted and getting that was tough crew. The most rewarding thing was just, you know, I still marvel at creating a world and watching it bloom in front of my eyes, you know, walking onto Warner Brothers, you know, being in my trailer and then walking out onto Warner Brothers at night and just being like, wow, this is in 1962 with all of the cars, the wet down on the street. Because sometimes I like to go away and just come back, you know, and see it with fresh eyes. Mm-hmm. And just that is just, you know, I'm like a kid in a candy store. Or when Maine Burke, you know, did Mr. J's record store. The first time, I mean, when I walked up to it and saw the Mr. J's sign, and, you know, I'd showed him a bunch of influences, like real record stores in Harlem from the era, and from Chicago and from Detroit from the era. And he just really nailed it. And then when I walked inside and I saw the record, I mean, it was just crazy. And he's so excited. He was like a kid in a candy store. He's like, look at the records, they're all from, I was like, are they all from I was like, I don't want to see no 1958 in there. And he was just like, no, check them. And I looked through all of the records and it was just so great. He didn't even have fillers he had all of the stacks were legit, which was really kind of great.
Wow. Next audience question says, could you talk about the role coincidence plays in the film? For you, is it coincidence or fate that repeatedly brings them together, and is there a difference?
Yeah, that's also a very good question. You know, the first kind of big theme is how unfinished business with the love of your life can kind of set you on this path of arrested development, how it can, you know, ruin your career and your other relationships going forward. And I mean, I think that it's a little bit of both. I think that, you know, I find in my own life, I do run into people like that. Like it just happens. And at a time when, I mean, these are the facts of my own life. I find that that's really prevalent in my life, that I've run into people, and it's insane. You know, I've run into my mailman in Barcelona, you know, I mean, it's just, so I find that it's really something that happens and something we don't really kind of talk about a lot. But fate is, you know, fate is, you kind of make your own fate at the same time, because what you start to notice is, as it gets further, is that they go and get each other. They start to make those things happen. So it goes from this kind of these happenstance to, you know, controlling your own destiny, which is about what the real arc is about, right? That's what Sylvie's doing. She's going from being a Stepford wife to controlling her own destiny and gaining agency. So that's what starts to happen as they get deeper and deeper in the third act. They start to, he goes and shows up, you know, and she goes and gets him. And so that's really kind of what starts to happen as we start to break apart just, you know, the idea of just happening upon each other. But it starts that way.
The next audience question is from someone who says that they have reviewed a lot of independent films this year, and this was one of the best, which I certainly agree with. And they ask, was this story to any degree inspired by actual people?
No, I mean, it's so funny. There's a sort of a comedian who has a joke, you know, it's like, oh, true story. And it's like, well, how about something funny that you made up? You know, and that's really, that's what we do, right? I mean, we're as writers and directors, that's, you know, as a writer, that's what I do. I make up stuff. And there may be, you know, like Nocturnal Animals, was that the movie, right? Mm-hmm. Like Nocturnal Animals kind of is a really great study on how the facts of your life wind up in your work, you know? So there are facts of my life that have wound up in this work, but it's not based on any, you know, it's its own thing. I was investigating certain themes, and the story kind of evolved out of that.
Mm-hmm. Well, we're almost out of time here, but I had one last question, which is, I'm curious how your background as a musician informs your style or your approach as a filmmaker, not necessarily to the music, but even just to the rhythms of the storytelling or the way you work with actors. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, that's a fair question. You know, I'm used to the collaborative process. I was in a band, and, you know, and it prepared me. I've been all around the world, and it's prepared me for this moment, and prepared me how to work with people and how to compromise sometimes, and see that there may be a different or better way than just the one way. If I know I'm right about something, I'll really I'll be steadfast about it. But generally speaking, I'm open to ideas, and because it could make the movie better. So there was that. But I also am a restaurant owner, and I'm used to large amounts of people working with and for me to open, you know, places. So that was actually equally as, you know, I'm used to having 300 people work for me. So it's just that really helps my directing, is that what I do is I'll show dailies to the grips and gaffers, just so we're all on the same page, because I know that, you know, there's no real hierarchy. You know, everything that everyone is doing is just as important as what I'm doing, mm-hmm. or it doesn't, or the whole thing falls apart. Right. And that's very much true in the restaurant business. It's true in the music business. It's true in all of the collaborative arts, as I call them. You know, I mean, if you want to be Picasso and just paint your own thing, then this isn't the business for you. You know, this is really, it's not just like a unilateral way of doing things. You have to open up yourself to the possibility that, you know, that other people are contributing. And once you know that, then what you do is you go and you say, look, this is what I have in mind. And so that's why you do that. That's why you show dailies to the grips and gaffers, you know, just so so they come in and you show them what they did yesterday, you know, so they know like, oh, okay, I see what you're trying to do. And then they give you their best work because it's a collaborative process and they feel like they're a part of it and they are a part of it. So, you know, and I'll talk to all the background people. I'll have a meeting with them and really talk about it, you know, so it's the same kind of thing. Like I said, from my other careers, I was able to, it really helps me. I'm used to addressing large amounts of people and I'm used to being one-on-one. I know about, you know, I know how to talk to people and with respect and let them feel like they're, even though I'm the boss, you know, it's, I don't fall, you know, I don't believe the hype. I don't believe that, you know, I'm more important than you.
Right.
And they, you know, you can't fake that. So.
Well, it's a really, really beautiful movie, Eugene, and I appreciate you talking with me about it. I've had a great time, and I want to thank you and thank everybody out there for watching. This has been great.
Yes, thank you, Jim. Thank you, Eugene, for this terrific conversation. So everyone, the film premieres on Amazon this Wednesday, December 23rd, and the soundtrack as well. So that's fantastic too. Thank you, the audience, for zooming in. Check our website for what's coming up, and happy holidays to everyone. Thank you.
All right. Thanks. Bye, everybody. Thanks, Eugene.
Thank you so much, Jim.
My pleasure. It was great.
Yeah, man, I appreciate your kind words about the film too.
I really loved it. I thought it was beautiful. It was just fantastic. So I hope it gets the audience it deserves. It's a great movie. Yeah,
me too. I'm glad we you know, wound up. Amazon is a great partner, and Jen Salke over there is she's got a lot of great taste. But I'm glad, you know, we went to Sundance and then we hit right into the pandemic. So I had a lot of friends whose films didn't sell, and you know,
yeah,
we're really lucky that we found a home.
Yeah, definitely.
Before this mess. So
yeah. All right. Well, good luck with it, and have a great holiday season.
Thanks, man. Same to you.
Okay. Take care.
Take care.